Now we come to the exciting part when we actually start to make notes on the chanter. Now this is another way, if you already play a wind instrument, where playing the bagpipes differs so dramatically from any other instrument. That is why I want you to leave your expectations at the door. Many people say, is it just like playing the flute or the recorder? And whilst the principle is the same, the air is moving through and you're lifting your fingers and putting them down appropriately to change the note pitch, the actual finesse of that is radically different, and for very good reason. The big thing, of course, is the fact that when you're playing the pipe chanter, your arms are over here, they're completely out of your vision, and the last thing you need to be worrying about is a very precise placement of your fingers, okay? You do not need to worry about using your fingertips with the bagpipes at all. It is just simply enough to cover the holes, and that is one of the things that I want you to work on and make sure that you're doing right from the get-go. Okay, now one thing we need to talk about very quickly is the difference between a left-handed piper and a right-handed piper. And as confusing as that is going to sound, if you are predominantly right-handed, okay, like I am, then the pipes are more than likely going to sit on the left hand side of your body. So you're going to have the bass drone closest to your head and the two tenor drones sitting further out. If you are the other way around and you're predominantly left handed, then we will configure the pipes in such a way that they will sit on your right hand side, and we will just simply swap the order of the drones so that the bass drone is now sitting here. So the big thing that we need to establish as a result of that, so if you're going to have the pipes on your left hand side, okay, your subdominant hand, that is your left hand, is going to be your top hand, and your right hand is going to be your bottom hand. If it's the other way around and you're going to have the pipes on your right hand side, okay, your right hand is going to be your top hand and your left hand is going to be the bottom hand, okay? Now, just for the purposes of disambiguation throughout this course, I will absolutely do my best to remember that I am teaching this for people who may have the option to put it on either side, but as much as possible, I'm going to try and use the phrases top hand and bottom hand. That will come down to your individual preference, so you need to remember that. If you forget what that means, essentially the top hand is going to be the one that sits closest to the bag on the pipes, and therefore is the one that the bag should be physically under when you're playing the pipes. Okay, the reason why I'm making this distinction is because first of all we're going to look at placing the fingers of the top hand on the chanter. The first thing, coming back to what I was talking about not using fingertips, is that, like I said, the goal is simply to cover the holes of the chanter fully. We're not looking at finesse. This isn't a stringed instrument where we need to have the precise location of the fingertip and get the pitch right. No, we're just simply looking to cover the hole. Now, one of the big considerations about being a piper, and this is where it really differs from playing any other wind instrument, is that unlike any other wind instrument or any other instrument at all for that reason, actually, come to think about it, is that the playing the bagpipes is more of a lifting motion of the fingers, okay? Whereas everything else you tend to be pressing down, okay? With the pipes covering the holes generally, they're more or less in a relaxed position, okay? They're not actively doing anything other than just simply covering the hole, so you shouldn't be putting any physical force into doing that. But the actual motion that you're going to use is lifting the fingers up and down, and that's where this, like I said, differs from all other wind instruments. We're just simply flapping your fingers up and down, and as long as that hole is getting covered every time, we're doing the job properly, okay? This is something that you need to bear in mind for your whole approach to holding the chanter and placing your fingers, because it's going to help you ultimately. Just a very brief point about that, thinking about the biomechanics of the hand, is that looking at your forearm, of course, your hand is designed naturally to do nothing more than this, okay? To grip things. And as a result, the muscles, which are actually all the way back here on your arm, everything down here is just an extensor, the muscles here are far more well developed than the muscles up here, okay? As a result, it can be a little bit weird to then think about lifting those muscles up and down. You know, there's a reason why we don't tend to go with picking things up like that and then bending your fingers back. And you'll probably find that if you do that right now, if you put your hand out like that and then try and lift your fingers back one by one, you find it is a little bit harder than bringing them forward. Of course, the other part of this is that your fingers aren't designed to bend backwards so much, maybe at the knuckle, but certainly not at the joins, unless, of course, you're hypermobile, which isn't necessarily a great thing down the line. But nonetheless, that is how your hand is designed. So that is an important consideration, because your natural inclination when you're holding the instrument is to grip on really hard. We don't want that. What that's going to ultimately do is it's actually going to put more resistance against the muscles up here that you're relying on to lift the fingers speedily, and it's going to slow you down. It's going to encumber your performance. The main thing that we're going to take from that, of course, is the fact that we're not going to use our fingertips to press on the holes. We're actually going to use the fleshy part of our finger in more or less the middle of the finger. So the middle section before the fingertip and the base of it. It's a nice fleshy part. When it presses down, the flesh splays out and therefore causes an airtight covering on the hole. All you're going to be doing is lifting your fingers straight up and down. So assuming that the chanter doesn't rotate, or the bag's not moving, or your fingers aren't slipping up and down the length of the chanter, as long as your fingers are coming straight back to exactly where they were, then the hole is covered and therefore the job is done. But obviously the first part in this process is getting that in your muscle memory. Now, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take our top hand. So like I said before, the top hand for me is my left hand. This is the hand joined to the arm under which the bag of the bagpipes is going to sit. For some people, it may be your right hand. Your thumb, this is the only of your two thumbs that you're going to use for any of the holes, and it is going to sit on the hole at the top on the back of the chanter. Okay? And because your thumb is nice and big, you're just going to simply push it down. I want you to put your thumb more or less at a right angle to the chanter. Okay? It can be slightly angled. Don't be like that. Don't be like that. You know, if it's slightly off a horizontal line, you're forgiven, as long as it's not putting undue pressure on your wrist when you start to add the fingers on the front. But that is the first hole that is going to get covered. Then using the remaining three fingers, not your little finger, this one does not get used, and again, of course, I mean that only on your top hand. This is the only little finger that does not get used. Those three fingers are therefore going to cover the first three holes at the top on the front of the chanter. And again, when I talked about the placement of the fingers, we want to use more or less the fleshy part here, just below where the fingertip section starts, okay? Do not grip the chanter. Do not grip it like you're holding onto it for dear life, okay? When you're holding that, it should be very easy for someone to come across and just take it from you, okay? The reason for this is that when you are playing the full instrument, the chanter is actually physically attached to the bag. So therefore, as long as the bag is being held onto properly, the chanter is firmly in place, and therefore your fingers are not holding up the chanter. They are not providing any support to the weight of the instrument in the slightest. Again, this is to help your fingers move at their absolute optimum best. We obviously want to make sure that we have comfortable coverage here. When I say that we want to have our fingers sitting straight, now I don't mean like this, okay? This is not Star Wars. We're not trying to shoot lightning out of our fingers, okay? We're not trying to lift anything heavy across the room using the power of our mind, not at all. This should be straight, but with no force put behind them, okay? So they can have a little bit of a bend in them, just a little bit. That should not feel uncomfortable to do this. Okay, you're not putting full lock on your fingers. But having said that, do not let them curl up too much, because as soon as you start to curl up too much, then you might find that a hole starts to open. And that's one of the big problems that many players have, is that suddenly, you know, they think they've got all 8 holes covered on the chanter, but there's a note being played that's way too high in the scale, and it turns out that what's happened is that one of these fingers up here is too relaxed and it's opened the hole. This is what that sounds like. This is the note we should be getting with all the fingers on. But if a finger up top is not covering properly, yeah, okay. So like I said, as long as the fleshy part of your finger is pushing down enough to cover the hole, job done. And while you're there, I want you to kind of wiggle your fingers from side to side, and I want you to feel the ridges of all the holes, okay? That is so important, because you need to be able to do this by feel ultimately, without looking at it. If you can feel the ridges underneath each of those fingers, then you know that your fingers are in the right place. This will take a bit of practice, That's the top hand taken care of. The bottom hand, for me, is my right hand. This is one that I want you to think very carefully about the placement of your fingers on. This is why, again, it's so important to make sure that your wrists are relaxed and not bent. But also because of where you place your thumb. Your thumb is not going to perform any function as far as playing a note is concerned directly. It's not covering any holes in the back. But the adequate placement of your thumb is going to be the make or break of how successfully you can use these two fingers. So I'm pointing at my little finger and my ring finger on that hand, okay? So what I want you to do is I want you to picture, before you even put your hand on the chanter, is I want you to take your thumb and I want you to line it up approximately with your middle finger and your ring finger, as if you're going to do Highland dancing and you're making a little stag symbol, okay? The reason why I'm telling you to do that is because your thumb is a crucial part of your grip. If your thumb is sitting way up here, yeah, you're going to get a reasonable amount of grip out of your index and your middle finger, but your ring and your little fingers, they're not going to have as much dexterity as is needed. So when you are about to place your fingers on the chanter with your bottom hand, I want you to make sure that your thumb is more or less lined up in the middle here, okay? It doesn't have to be precise. I don't want you to put your thumb under any stress, but the closer you can get your thumb to the middle point there, the easier you're going to find it to use these fingers, and you will find out why very soon. But having said that, placing your bottom hand fingers, the 4 of those fingers on the front here, they're going to cover the 4 remaining holes on the bottom. And one thing to watch out for, of course, is your little finger, because it is considerably shorter than your ring finger. So you will probably find that you need to slide your bottom hand ever so slightly further across the holes on the bottom hand than you did with the top fingers, just so that your pinky, your little finger, can cover that hole properly. Okay, so for me, that means that in comparison to my top hand fingers, I'm more or less touching the holes just about where the fingertip join happens. But with the bottom hand, the holes are very firmly in the middle of this middle section so that my pinky can get on that hole there, okay? Later on, you're going to be doing a lot with this finger here, okay? So this is why it's so important to make sure that you've got that posture right. And again, when we're sitting holding that, you know, we're not gripping onto this for dear life. This is not a sword or any stretch of the imagination. We don't need to worry about holding onto this when we're playing the full pipes because it's being held for us. We're just doing enough just to make sure that the holes are being covered. Again, I can shake this and I can feel that moving a little bit, and that's fine. That's what we want. Bearing in mind that the thumb, if you can see here, the thumb is more or less in the middle of those 2 fingers because it's giving me adequate purchase by pushing down on all 4 fingers towards the chanter there. I can feel that there's an even amount of grip coming from them. Okay, so just to recap that, the back hole at the top, you're going to take the thumb on your top hand, which for people playing the pipes on the left hand side of the body is your left hand, and for people playing on the right hand side is your right hand, and that is going to sit more or less at a right angle covering that hole. The first 3 fingers on your top hand, not your pinky, are going to sit covering those first 3 holes, again with more or less the fleshy part just below the tip of the finger is going to cover those holes. The bottom hand, my right hand side, those 4 fingers, they are going to cover the bottom 4 holes, making sure that the hand is pushed sufficiently far across to ensure that the little finger is covering the hole adequately, with the thumb sitting more or less in the middle there. And that is all of the holes covered. For the keen-eyed among you, you will have noticed that on my chanter, the full length chanter, there's an extra set of holes at the bottom here. You will also find them on a pipe chanter. This is simply a design for the chanter to produce the lowest note on a longer scale chanter. You will not find that on the shorter ones. And again, with the bottom hand, when you've got those fingers on, I want you to wiggle them about from side to side, and I want you to feel the ridges, okay? And if you can feel that, then you know that your finger's in the right place. And making sure that your fingers are straight-ish enough so that the fleshy part of your skin is splaying out and covering the hole. Not so straight that you physically feel like you've been mummified or you've been stricken with rigor mortis. I'm not worried about that. You don't want your fingers to curl to any point that the holes are going to open by themselves, okay? And one final thing, of course, the reason why I've said to you to put the chanter in the middle of your mouth is to look down. I want you to make sure that the holes are pointing out straight out in front of you. Okay? Often people subconsciously, as they're learning, they're maybe turning the chanter to one side or the other, and by doing that, you're not getting coverage on those holes. So every time you pick it up, I want you to look down and make sure that the holes are in front of you. Every time as we start to go through the scale, which is coming next, of course, if you find that there's a sound coming out that doesn't sound like it should be coming out, then I want you to make sure that the holes are in front of you and they're not turned to one side, because that could probably be the issue that you're encountering.